To understand this, you have to go back to what young brother here referred to as the house Negro and the field Negro. Back during slavery, there was two kinds of slaves. There was the house Negro and the field Negro. The house Negro, they lived in the house with master. They dressed pretty good. They ate good because they ate his food, what he left. They lived in the attic or the basement, but still they lived near their master. And they loved their master more than the master loved himself. They would give their life to save their master's house quicker than the master would. The house Negro, if the master said, we got a good house here, the house Negro said, yeah, we got a good house here. No, the master said we, he said we. That's how you can tell a house Negro. If the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro said, what's the matter, boss? We sick. We sick. He identified himself with his master more than his master identified with himself. And if you came to the house Negro and said, let's run away, let's escape, let's separate, the house Negro would look at you and say, man, you crazy. What you mean separate? Where is there a better house than this? Where can I wear better clothes than this? Where can I eat better food than this? That was that house Negro. In those days, he was called a house nigger. And that's what we call him today, because we still got some house niggers running around here. This modern house Negro loves his master. He wants to live near him. He'll pay 3 times as much as the house is worth just to live near his master. And then brag about, I'm the only Negro out here. I'm the only one on my job. I'm the only one in this school. You're nothing but a house Negro. And if someone come to you right now and say, let's separate, you say the same thing that the house Negro said on the plantation. What you mean separate? From America? This good white man? When are you going to get a better job than you get here? I mean, this is what you say. I ain't left nothing in Africa. That's what you say while you left your mind in Africa. On that same plantation, there was the field Negro. The field Negro, those were the masses. There was always more Negroes in the field than there was Negroes in the house. The Negro in the field caught hell. He ate leftovers. In the house, he ate high up on the hog. The Negro in the field didn't get nothing but what was left of the insides of the hog. They call them chitlins nowadays. In those days, they called them what they were. Guts. That's what you were, a gut eater. And some of you all still gut eaters. The field Negro was beaten from morning till night. He lived in a shack, in a hut. He wore cast-off clothes. And he hated his master. I say he hated his master. He was intelligent. That house Negro loved his master. But that field Negro, remember, they were in the majority. And they hated his master. When the house caught on fire, he didn't try and put it out. That field Negro prayed for a wind, for a breeze. When the master got sick, the field Negro prayed that he died. If someone come to the field Negro and said, let's separate, let's run, he didn't say, where are we going? He said, any place is better than here.
Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are live!
Salatu wa salamu ala Rasulullah wa ba'd. In the name of Allah, and the peace and blessings of Allah be upon us, last and final messenger. Family, friends, foes, haters, and hateettes, welcome back to the Feachaz. I greet you all in peace and love with no hatred in my heart. Assalamu Alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So before we begin, please like, please subscribe, and please share. As you know, we got a lot of haters up in here. Now, family, today's topic is actually a very, very important topic. We're talking today about the differences, or you could say rather the similarities in the tactics of Black feminism and African feminism. What are they used for? What are the strategies behind them? With receipts, of course, because all we do is receipts here. And we are going to get very deep on this, inshallah. So make sure you share this, and let's get right into it, inshallah. So women in the workforce is a very modern phenomenon, right, which took off after World War II. But historically and internationally, women were never considered part of what we now know as the workforce. That is not a thing, okay, historically, right? And it was only women for the better part of 4+ centuries that have ever been almost 100% employed for the better part of more than 400 years is Black women. Let's be very clear about that. Okay? Black women are the only women historically who had to work by force. And what y'all might not know is that the feminist movement never originally started because of women's right to work. That is quite modern. Rather, women, especially white women, never wanted to work, and that was never historically their right. That was a bait and switch tactic after World War II. White women, during the times of slavery, were seeking rights from men due to ownership of slaves. And not just slaves, but property as well. Okay, so land, right? But mostly slaves. Okay, since white women were considered under their husbands as a protected class, they never had the right to own property. But slavery made multitudes of white people very, very wealthy. And since when a white woman got married, everything she owned then became the property of her husband. And again, what did white women own? They owned slaves and sometimes land passed down from their fathers. So because of the husbands of these white women, they would squander their wealth in bad business deals and whatnot. They would take them to court and eventually do what was known as anti-nuptial agreements. Okay, we talked about this before, right? Anti-nuptial or anuptial agreements. So long before you had prenuptial agreements, what we know as prenuptial agreements, these agreements where men are trying to protect their assets from predatory women, you had anti-nuptial agreements. This was the beginning of feminism, and even though it wasn't called feminism at the time, right, nonetheless, that's how it all started. They would enter these agreements and even fight their male family members rather, for what is known as chancery courts. It's a type of court. Okay, they would fight them in chancery courts. Okay, so I'm going to read for you from the book called They Were Her Property, written by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. Okay? So let me know how the sound is. Inshallah, I know last time we had some issues with the echo. Okay? So let me know how that is right now. And let's get right into it. Let's go over here. So I'm going to pull up my book here. 1 second, y'all. Like I said, all we do is receipts here. So, Miss Jones Rogers, she's writing about a story, right? And she says, Ebenezer Johnson's wife frequently accompanied her husband on slave trading and kidnapping excursions. Slave trading and kidnapping excursions. Okay? Meaning kidnapping slaves. What kind of slaves? You're going to hear in a minute. Johnson was a member of a notorious group that operated on the Delaware-Maryland border, kidnapping indentured and freed people of color from the North and selling them into slavery in the South. Okay? Now, why is this important? Well, we're going to get into it, okay? Before their marriage, okay, Mary had saved approximately $600 or $700, but these funds legally became William's when they married. Y'all see where I'm going with this? White women never historically had a right to ownership of property. And what was the property they were really fighting for? They're fighting for slaves because that was the most liquid asset that you could own during slavery. So we're going to go back here. Just give me a moment here. All right. This is from page 34. Okay. November 1841. While still a resident of Mississippi, Susan Hunter purchased 18 enslaved people on 3 separate occasions. She later moved to Kentucky, and shortly after her arrival, she went to court to have her legal title to these slaves recognized. She had been advised that Kentucky law granted a married woman, okay, the right to purchase slaves or other property and hold the same to her own separate use. And she asked the court to recognize her right to hold these slaves for her sole and separate use in the state. The court acknowledged Hunter's ownership of the slaves and named her in the petition. Moving on. Okay. In Louisiana, where civil law prevailed, the system's state and property law was also allowed married women to hold a certain kind of property in their own names to control it. You see how the laws are changing now? Because there's a lot of wealth involved. White people didn't have this much wealth before. And to dispose of it without special provisions. Even so, women in the state often insisted in signing anti-nuptial contracts. That's before prenuptials. What did we say? There were anti-nuptial contracts with their future husbands, and they also sometimes sued their husbands for a separation of property after they married. They would sue their own husbands to separate their property. Because, as we mentioned, once a white woman got married, everything she owned automatically became her husband's. Okay, let's move on here. We're going to go to, let's go to page 44, I think. Yep. Okay. Feuding women and their family members were not the only people who found themselves hauled into courts over married women slaves. A community member might accuse a woman of stealing slaves and leaving the state with them. Business agents brought claims against women for selling slaves to prevent creditors from seizing them. Others demanded payment for services rendered when women had separate estates from which they could comfortably repay their debts. Southern women answered these accusations in their replies would vividly demonstrate their willingness to appear in the most public realms. This is significant. This is very significant because women were not, to appear publicly like that, especially in courts and whatnot. But they would do that of Southern society to defend their property rights and challenge the power of anyone, including their husbands, to control the enslaved people that they owned. Furthermore, judges who adjudicated their cases often ruled in their favor. Chancery courts, or courts of equity, were critical to a woman's ability to control and manage her property and request legal intervention in maintaining it. Okay? Moving a little bit forward. If a married woman entered into a contract with her husband, whether or before or after the marriage took place, chancery courts would enforce it. What were chancery courts doing? They were enforcing the laws where white women can keep their slaves. If a wife placed her separate property into her husband's hands as a trustee or simply as a manager, but the husband used or disposed of it in ways that she objected to, chancery courts would uphold her rights to that property, meaning the slaves, and make her husband repay her for her property if he had sold or squandered. Chancery courts recognized a married woman's right to possess and control a separate estate and dispose of it as the terms of the state allowed. Legal scholars and women's historians have argued that in the 19th century, jurists protected women's interest. Pay attention. They were acting as patriarchs. These men, they argue, stepped in to restore peace to the households with faltering and fallible male household heads. Do y'all get that? Essentially what they were saying is that the court now is acting as a patriarch. This is the beginning of your feminism. This is where it all started. And we are not done yet. So now, after the Civil War, what is the situation that we have after the Civil War? Feminism has always been racist. It was rooted in racism to begin with. White women were so angry because white men were stealing their slaves, and then when slavery ended and they no longer had slaves, they were angry that their former poor, destitute, dirty, illiterate, uneducated slaves who just fought, took up arms, lost their limbs and their lives in the Civil War to keep the Union, were now getting the opportunity to vote, and they weren't. That's how the women's suffrage movement, that what we know as the women's suffrage movement, started. Women had no rights to property until and after slavery. Through chancery courts and anti-nuptial agreements. Then the civil rights, a civil war happened. And what do you find? You find that these white women are complaining that these poor, dusty black people who just got out of slavery were now getting the right to vote, and they weren't getting the right to vote. That's what they were complaining about. Don't let anybody else tell you anything else. They literally started the women's suffrage movement because black men were now given the opportunity to vote. They didn't fight They didn't pick cotton. They didn't tend to wounded. All they had to do was stay at home and not die, these white women. But because their former slaves left and were trying to do for themselves, these white women lost their minds. You don't believe me? Let's quote some of these pioneers of women suffrage. The most infamous being Elizabeth Cady Stanton, or Elizabeth Cady Lang Stanton. She said, and I'm quoting here, "We educated, virtuous white women are more worthy of the vote." She said that. She also said, and we quoted this one a while back, "Think of Patrick and Sambo and Hans and Youngtung, who don't know the difference between a monarchy and a republic, who cannot read the Declaration of Independence or Webster's spelling book, making laws for Lydia Maria Childs, Lucretia Mott, and Fanny Kemble." These are all women suffrage giants. Lydia Maria Childs, Lucretia Mott, and Fanny Kemble. She also says, you can't make this stuff up. She also says, "The male element is a destructive force, stern, selfish, aggrandizing, loving war, violence, conquest, acquisition, breeding in the material and moral world, alike discord, disorder, disease, and death. See what a record of bloody and cruelty the pages of history reveals." She's talking about black males. Okay? She also said, we're not done. She also said, the old anti-slavery school that women must stand back and wait until the Negroes shall be recognized. But we say, if you will not give the whole loaf of suffrage to the entire people, give it to the most intelligent first. Who's the most intelligent? White women. If intelligence, justice, and morality are to have precedence in the government, let the question of women, not black women, white women. How do you know? Bilal, listen here. Okay? Let the question of women be brought up first and that of the Negro last. These are your founding mothers of feminism. Women's suffrage. Okay? It is harder for me to fight prejudice against myself than against Negroes because I know them intimately. And we can go on and on and on and on with quotes from her. But I think you get the point. So, how did feminism itself, because mind you, it started with slavery and then it morphed into women's suffrage after, black people got the right to vote, and then it became about work. And why is this important? What does this have to do with African feminism? We're getting to that. Just relax, okay? Relax. What happened? World War II happened. That's what happened. And as the men were leaving the fight in Europe, this did two things. It left a massive gap in what we now call the workforce, and it forced, for the first time in history, white women to work. Before that, they never worked, nor were they thinking about work. But the reason why they were working was because of necessity. And we must make the distinction very clear, because black women always had to work. And that phenomenon has never stopped. White women were fighting to keep ownership of these very same black women. And after black men fought to keep white folks' country together and got the right to vote, white women fought to kibosh that. If anybody want to ask you about the history of feminism, you know where to find it now. It's on record, okay, with the receipts. And after black men fought for this, and even black men ended up fighting in World War II, mind you, and they, along with white men, were going to Europe. What were white women forced to do? They were forced by force to work. They had to work. They ain't got no more slaves. They ain't got no more men. Their husbands, their sons, their fathers, all gone. Then when they were forced to work for the first time in history, it was the bankers, like David Rockefeller, who funded the feminist movement. That's when it became feminism. He funded the feminist movement. But why would he do that, Bilal? He did it because he saw an opportunity to double the banking conglomerates, their tax revenues through the Federal Reserve. How are you going to do it? You'll get the men to work and the women to work. Well, how do you convince these women who didn't want to work to begin with, how can you convince them to go to work? Quite simple. You make it a rights issue. Do you see how that works? And up until this very day, and any one of you can do this, is very easy, the Rockefeller Foundation continues to fund the feminist movement. Any one of y'all can go right now on Google and just Google Rockefeller Foundation. You'll see for yourself. So women, white women rather, were working by necessity, and through philanthropy and propaganda, it became a woman's rights issue. You get it? That's where you start seeing those pictures of, yeah, we can do it, and these women with flexing their muscles and all kind of stuff. Propaganda. That's when you started seeing it. However, feminism for black women has always been much more sinister. It's never been the same thing. Black women never had no issues with their man. Those issues with their man started in the 70s. The 60s and the 70s. But before that, you will not find any time in history where black women were complaining about the black man. Never. And I challenge anybody to try to find it. But what is black feminism? What is it rooted in? And what is it for black women and black people in general? Margaret Sanger. Do y'all remember her? We talked about her before. Margaret Sanger in the 1920s the eugenicist, the infamous eugenicist, and one of the founders of Planned Parenthood, she pushed for Planned Parenthood for black women. She pushed for that. She pushed for the sterilization of black women through Planned Parenthood. That's how all that started. And the eugenicists, the same eugenicists, have been going to every single darker skinned country on earth, telling poor, darker skinned people the reason why you're poor is because you're having too many babies, so you need a Planned Parenthood program. Y'all see where I'm going with this? Furthermore, black feminism was used to dismantle and demolish the black family in the 60s and 70s for the first time. How did they do it? They did it through welfare, where black women were financially incentivized by the government to kick their men out their homes. If you want this welfare check, you got to kick your man out. Now, you got to think about this. Before the civil rights movement, black folks had their own neighborhoods, their own businesses, their own everything. Before the civil rights movement started. Then the civil rights movement was co-opted by integrationists. And what were the integrationists saying? You can go to the same schools, you can, have a home anywhere, all this kind of nonsense, which of course, we know is a bunch of bullcrap. Right now, we know now, right? But vision in hindsight is only 20/20, right? We know that now. But these are the tactics of the enemy. Bait and switch tactics. Okay? They make you think that the reason why your schools are dysfunctional is not because, we are taking taxation without representation. No, that's not it. It's not because we are not putting your tax dollars in white neighborhoods and not giving you squat to improve your schools. The reason why your schools are dysfunctional is because they're in black neighborhoods. So send your kids to the white neighborhoods and you'll get a good education, right? That's what they say. You get me? Likewise, the reason why we're giving you these welfare checks is because you're poor, and we don't want the men to take advantage of these welfare checks. We need you to raise your children, because men don't raise children, money raises children. So take this money to raise your children. But if there's a man in your house, we're going to stop these checks. And that's when you started hearing the moniker strong, black, independent woman. Very famous in the 70s, and up until this very day, we are suffering greatly from the economic intervention into black homes. What does all this have to do with African feminism? Well, my slow Negro friend, I'm glad you asked. Even though the tactics are different, the goals are exactly the same when it comes to Africans. You see it, and what you see in the West is the same thing that's going on in Africa, but just different tactics. What are the tactics? What are the tactics? What are the core tactics they try to do? They try to finance the destruction of families. How do they do that? They try to separate the man from the woman. How do they do that? They try to promote eugenics through Planned Parenthood and LGBT and all this kind of stuff. How do they do that, you ask? Well, I'm about to show you. I'm about to show you. You see, in the West, the government weaponized tax dollars, in a direct attack on the black family, forcing fathers out of their homes. They also made sure that the prison industrial complex was ready to go to fill the jails up with fatherless black boys and make sure that these boys will be punished for life for having criminal records, regardless of the crime or guilt for that matter. This then makes a permanent underclass and a steady slave population through prison labor. As a matter of fact, let me just show you. Let me just try to see if I can pull this up. 1 second. Let me just try to pull this up, inshallah. 1 second. Because y'all going to say I'm talking nonsense. No, I'm not. 1 second. One second, y'all. Y'all ain't ready for this. Let me get my thing up. Let's go over here. 1 second. Where am I? There we go. Sorry, y'all. I know the sound kind of failed there, but basically, if you saw that, 12 major corporations benefiting from the prison industrial complex. From them is McDonald's, okay, Wendy's, Walmart, Starbucks, Sprint, the phone company, Verizon, phone company, Victoria's Secret, Fidelity Investments, J.C. Penney, and American Airlines. How does McDonald's, pray tell you ever wonder why McDonald's food is so cheap? McDonald's uses inmates to produce frozen foods. Inmates process beef for patties. They may also process bread, milk, and chicken products. Wendy's has been identified as relying on prison labor to reduce its cost of operations. Inmates have also processed beef for beef patties. You cannot make this crap up. That's why your fast food restaurants are able to give you cheap burgers. Walmart, well, Walmart, you expect Walmart anyways, right? The company uses inmates for manufacturing purposes. The company hires, in quotations, inmates to clean products of UPC barcodes so that the products can be resold. You ever wonder why in the States they're always talking about tough on crime, tough on crime, tough on crime? It's like Malcolm X said, how can you have more cops and more crime? It's just proof that the cops are in cahoots with the criminals. This is the game. If they just started putting white folks in jail all willy-nilly, how would that system work? Black people make up 13% of the population in the States, and yet half of the population in the prisons, more than half. And this is how they do it, and this is why they're doing it. And this is the importance of feminism. Because if you have strong family units, where are you going to get your steady supply of school to prison Negroes? Despite going through slavery and Jim Crow and mass lynchings and whatnot, after slavery, black people essentially owned their own businesses and were married at an 80% clip. Now, in 2023, the illegitimate child rate in the black community is 80%. Over 70% of families, black families that is, in the West are single mother families. But close to 70% now. I think the stats went down. But again, they fudged the numbers, right? Because we put this out last time, that they changed the definition of what a family is. So instead of saying married, they changed the definition to make it look like, okay, black folks are doing well now. So what's a family? By definition, it's any two adults, whether they're married or whether they're not. Are y'all getting this? But again, Bilal, what does this have to do? I'm not getting what this has to do with Africa and African feminism. We're getting to that, my slow Negro friend. Let me just get this all set up here. 1 second, y'all. 1 second, y'all. Let me see if I can get this thing here. 1 second. You know, in Africa, the tactics are different, but the strategies and the outcomes are exactly the same. Since African countries don't have a welfare system to kick their men out their homes, how is it done? Y'all want to take a guess? How do you think it's done? Who wants to take a guess? Sister Tika says education. That is very, very, very close. Brother Hanis says incentives for women to start businesses. Very, 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 very close. Both of you are actually both on the same track, actually. Fatima says, to be frank, development aid and directly aimed at empowering women to girls, but not men or boys. Fatima is actually the closest, because she's actually defining what we're looking at. They do it through NGOs. They do it through NGOs. All of you are on the same track. They do this through non-profit or non-governmental organizations. These NGOs go to African countries under the guise of helping women through microloans. This is something that Brother Hanif mentioned. They don't help men, they only help the women. This is something that Fatima mentioned. And these same women set up businesses with these loans. African countries, by definitions, are colonies, and they are sending 30% and upwards of their raw resources and wealth to Europe. Not some African countries, all of them. So the men in these countries are doing all the slave labor while not realizing they're actually slaves. They are the miners. They are the police. They are the soldiers, and so on. They are the warlords. Have you ever wondered why there's always so much war in Africa, but not a single African country, if they all got together, couldn't produce a gun? They could not make a gun by themselves, but yet they have the most guns to kill each other. Where are these guns coming from? Not a single gun producer in any black neighborhood in the West. But yet black men are mowing each other down on a daily basis with guns they don't produce. Where are they getting these guns from? Furthermore, in most African countries, education is not free. And this is something that Sister Tika mentioned. So educating the population is done mostly through what? NGOs, churches, religious nonprofits, and so on. This has been the case since World War I, when Europeans were going into Africa to colonize Africa. That's how Africans have been getting educated. And let's see some of these organizations and what they're actually teaching Africans. Shall we have a look? Let's have a look, shall we? Let's have a look. So y'all gonna say, oh no, Bilal's capping. Bilal does not cap. Let's have a look. I'm gonna read directly from their own websites This is from femnet.org. Now you tell me if any of this stuff tell me if they're talking to Africans or Westerners, or if there's any difference between African feminism and Western feminism. Shall we have a look? Remember, we talked about their tactics. Look at here. Power is about who controls the self-ideology, access, and resources. Power imbalances lead to structural inequities and gender-based norms that perpetuate threats to women's well-being and violate women's rights. How did we say the feminist movement was worded by the Rockefellers? It was Trojan horse through women's rights. Femnet will, thus, through this focus area, aim to innovatively repoliticize, feminize, and disrupt orthodox power. What is the orthodox power? Their own men. And oppressive systems, structures, and processes as a basis of creating equal gender power relations. So what you have here, these are their own words. Let me ask y'all, does this sound like an African speaking, or does it sound like a Westerner speaking? Somebody put it in the chat, please. If you didn't know this was an African NGO for feminism in Africa, would you think it's African? Or would you think it's a Western organization? Somebody put it in the chat, please. Gender inequities are often rooted in uneven dynamics that give disproportionate power to one group over another. You can't make this stuff up. Out of the three key drivers of women's discrimination, limited economic autonomy, bodily autonomy, and political decision-making power. Evidence shows that limited economic autonomy has had the least traction in the past 2 decades, especially at national levels. Macroeconomic policies and frameworks have also on their part largely remained blind to this reality, hence not adequately creating equal and social economic opportunities for women. If you didn't know this was African, would you think it's African? As a result, women continue to be disproportionately affected by poverty, unemployment, inequality. Femnet will, in this regard, work towards greater conscientization of women and girls, enhancing women's political participation, besides unpacking the boundaries to push structures or norms to disrupt and open invited or created spaces to engage on women's economic justice. This is just a Trojan horse for enslaving the women as well as the men, because the men are the ones who really don't have the economic opportunities unless they are willing to be enslaved. Okay? Or a Trojan horse for the LGBTs and whatnot, or any type of liberal agenda, to be honest, but mostly to keep the entire population permanently enslaved. Permanently enslaved. Now that's just Femnet. Let's have a look at this one here. African Women's Development Fund. We envision a world where freedom and dignity are achieved for all, and where gender justice and reality for African women, girls, and gender diverse people. This right here, gender diverse people and whatnot, when they start talking like this is the Trojan horse to bring LGBTs to Africa through these same NGOs. that is an LGBT talking point. And it's always Trojan horse through feminism. Every single time. That's how it starts. Our mission: to fund, strengthen, and uphold organizations and movements led by African feminists, women, girls, and gender diverse people in pursuit of gender justice and social transformation. What in the world do Africans need with feminism? With all the problems that they got. Food insecurity, health insecurity, water insecurity, war. Look what's going on in Sudan today. Look what's going on in Libya today. Mass slavery. Look what's going on in Tunisia today. Rampant racism. Rampant racism and blatant. The usurping of resources. And all this going on, but there is a robust feminist movement in Africa today. The grant-making foundation that supports local, national, and regional women's organizations working towards the empowerment of African women and the promotion of realization of their rights by specializing in grant-making and focused, tailored movement building programs. We work and strengthen and support the work of African women's organizations by amplifying and celebrating African women's voices and achievement. If you didn't, let's take out African for a second. Let's read this again without putting African in it, okay? All I'm going to do is take out the word African. A grant-making foundation that supports local, national, and regional women's organizations towards the empowerment of women and the promotion of realization of their rights. By specializing grant-making, focused, tailored movement building programs, we work to strengthen and support the work of women's organizations. You see how that works? But wait, there's more. You might be asking, Bilal, we understand that these organizations now are, trying to push feminism, but who's funding them? You want to know who's funding them? What does it say right here? Ford Foundation. This is just one. Do you know what the Ford Foundation is? Yes, that Ford. The car company. Why is it the Ford Foundation? And there are many more by the way. Why is the Ford Foundation interested in the politics of feminism in Africa? Ford Foundation, of all people? They're so concerned about women's rights in Africa? Ford Foundation. You can't make this crap up. But that's just one of them. There's so many more, right? They also have Friedrich Ebert and Stiftung from Germany involved in these programs. Banks involved in these programs. Universities involved in these programs. You'll be shocked. You'll be shocked of the amount of resources that's going to push Rhodes University. is pushing feminism in Africa. Rhodes University, that Rhodes University. Duke University. You'll be totally stunned. Why can't Ford Foundation fight for reparations for black people right here in the West? They out there doing philanthropy for feminism in Africa. You need to stop and think about this stuff. And what is the result? The result is African women are speaking like black women in the West. You see, in a natural environment, the men would work and the woman would stay at home, correct? Never in African history, or history of the world for that matter, do you find women talking about the right to work. Not until after World War II. Who funded it? Rockefeller Foundation. They were the first ones to do it. And they packaged it under women's rights in order to double tax the population. So they make this fake war between men and women. Mind you, white women were fighting their men for owning slaves first. That's how it all started. They want to own their slaves. They don't want their white men taking their slaves. Feminism was a fight between white men and white women. Only them. Now they're involving everybody. They're inviting and they're funding it. Ford Foundation, Duke University, Rhodes University, who else? So many groups, you'd be shocked, man. Banks, you name it. And not a single one of these companies want to talk about reparations for black folk in the West. But they're happy to send money for feminism in Africa. In a just world, you would build an economy where women stay home, raise the children of your man, and serve your husband. Okay? But these women, if you were listening, these women are talking like Western white women when it comes to feminism. So these women get the grants to start their businesses and build their economy. And we have history of that here in the West. What happens to families when you economically empower your women while economically stifling your men? What happens? What happens to the families? And it's done by design, mind you. It's done by design. This is some insane stuff. See, if you were serious about freedom, like you say you are, all these, feminists, they always talk the same. They when they speak the same. We want, equal rights and these equal rights and whatnot. Never, ever, ever was this an issue in Africa. Never. And even in Europe, for that matter, right? That all became an issue after World War II, as we mentioned. But if you were serious, you think they would fight their ever invisible colonizers, not your men, not your own men, the people who are stifling your men from work and forcing them into digging the natural resources of the continent sending it to Europe to manufacture into products and reselling it to Africans at 3, 4, 5 times the cost. You think that would be the goal? But again, this literature, as you can very clearly see, is not organically African, not in the least, but it is a purely Western Trojan horse. There's no difference in talking points whatsoever, and otherizing their own men in their society, making their men the reason why we are poor, is not because of the same people who are funding this movement. We are poor because the men in our society don't respect women's rights. Can you imagine? The same demons that keep you poor and decrepit and make all kinds of fake tribes all over Africa. Who remembers the Rwandan War? Hutus and Tutsi. 2 fake tribes that Europeans made. The Europeans came in with their anthropology. They never had these tribes before. These tribes are fake. Hutu and Tutsi. And they came to Rwanda, and because they made these tribes, it caused one of the most destructive civil wars we've seen in the 20th century. Absolutely destructive. They are the ones who do this. And they do this all over Africa to keep you warring and divided. And incentivize these men of these fake tribes to commit the most heinous atrocities, particularly against women. Atrocities that historically are not African in origin, not in the least. You will never find these atrocities committed throughout African history or even Asian history at all. Unheard of atrocities. But they were taught these tactics by the French, by the British, by the Italians, by the Germans. Like what? What atrocities are you talking about, Bilal? Like cutting the breast off of nursing mothers. Like using bayonets like they did in Kenya as tools of you-know-what against women. With bayonets they did this. Against women. Africans never don't know anything about that. Like in the Congo. And up until this day, this tactic is being used all over Africa, where they chop the hands off the Congolese. Shout out to King Leopold. Because of rubber collecting. You didn't collect enough rubber, you get your hand chopped off. And up until this day, if you go to Mecca and during Hajj time, you will find hundreds of black Africans with no arms because they chop off their arms from their young and they send them to Mecca on Umrah to beg. This was never done before. These same demons are now funding feminism to introduce you to broken families, eugenics, and through abortion and the LGBT agenda. And you believe that the problem is not these demons, but it's your men. It's your men. That's what you believe. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation What was their philanthropy in Africa? What were they doing in Africa? Were they building wells? No, that's not what they were doing. Were they building schools? No, that's not what they were doing either. What were they doing in Africa? And India and Pakistan, for that matter. Any darker skinned country, really. Africa and all over the continent of Africa. They were setting up Planned Parenthood clinics for abortion. There was a major issue that happened in India where hundreds of thousands of women died from these sterilization programs of that same foundation. And vaccinations. Y'all hearing me? This is what these people do. And now they want to bring feminism to Africa. And it's not a different feminism. It's the same feminism that they brought to the black community. The same. We will give you the money. You don't need no man. Don't worry about that. We will set up your businesses. Don't worry about that. We will take care of your children. Don't worry about that. Women, what are they talking about? What you call women's bodily rights and stuff. When they start talking about body rights and stuff of that nature, that means abortion. That means abortion. Do you remember in the 70s and 80s when they were setting up vaccination programs in Africa? I want to see, who knows? When they were setting up vaccination programs in the late 70s and early 80s, in Africa. It started in South Africa and Zimbabwe and whatnot. What were these vaccination clinics doing to these Africans? Telling them that they're giving them wellness shots. It's just a wellness shot. What were they doing? Somebody put it in the chat. Who knows what they were doing with these clinics? Late 70s, early 80s. You know what they were giving these Africans? Telling them we're giving you a wellness shot? Who knows what they were doing? Somebody put in the chat. Thank you. Taskin. They were giving them HIV. Millions and millions and millions of Africans were intentionally inoculated with HIV. Then they came back to the West saying, oh, these jungle bunnies got this disease from having relations with green monkeys and stuff. And then they changed the narrative again. They changed the narrative again. And what did they say? They said, no, originally HIV, it came from eating raw monkey meat. Can you imagine? And now through these NGOs, which are not organic, by the way, none of them are organic, it's impossible for you to be repeating almost word for word every single feminist talking point from the West in Africa and call that organic. Impossible. Through NGOs and corporations and whatnot, they are funding to break up the African family program. Let's keep these Africans permanently enslaved. And that's why they're pushing so hard this LGBT in Africa, trying to threaten sanctions against Uganda, trying to bribe government officials all over Africa for LGBT. But this is how they do it, through these NGOs. Anyways, I want to know if y'all want to, because it's getting late, I want to know if y'all want a smoke show tonight. If you guys do, just let me know in the chat, and we can do a smoke show. I can invite you guys on for a chat about the same issue. If not, we will leave it at that. Like, subscribe, share. Hit me up on Patreon. سبحانك وبحمدك وشهد لا إله إلا أنت واستغفرك وأتوب إليك والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.